My daughter told me to stay in the background at her own gallery opening, the one I'd helped fund with a quiet dip into the savings my late husband Arthur and I had painstakingly accumulated. "It's just Mom," she'd said, her voice a carefully modulated whisper, her eyes flicking nervously towards her new, impossibly chic art world friends. Your style is a little more traditional. We want the focus to be entirely on the art, on the modern aesthetic. So if you could just mingle quietly, perhaps near the catering tables, that would be wonderful." Mingle quietly, near the catering tables, like an inconvenient piece of old furniture, to be tucked away where it wouldn't clash with the polished concrete floors and the stark, challenging canvases. My own daughter Clara, the child I had rocked to sleep with off-key lullabies, whose scraped knees I had kissed better, whose every art project, from clumsy finger paintings to her ambitious, messy college sculptures, I had praised with unwavering, if sometimes bewildered, maternal pride. She thought my quiet nod, the pained smile I managed to summon, was acceptance, perhaps even relief on my part, at being spared the social spotlight. She didn't see the invisible crack that her words, so casually delivered, had etched across my heart. She didn't understand that staying in the background was something I had done my entire life for her, a silent, selfless retreat to allow her to shine. But this time was different. This time, her dismissal wasn't just a thoughtless oversight, it was a deliberate public marginalization. And as I stood near those catering tables, nursing a glass of overly sweet punch, a new resolve began to crystallize within me, cold and hard as the minimalist sculptures surrounding me. If she wanted me in the background of her life, then so be it. But I would choose the background. I would define its terms. And it would be a background so vast, so complete, that she might one day find herself squinting into the distance, wondering where the familiar, comforting landscape of her mother's unconditional love had gone. They say a mother's love is boundless, and perhaps it is. But even boundless love has a breaking point, a moment when self-preservation whispers a louder, more insistent truth. And that night, amidst the clinking glasses and the self-important chatter of the art world, my breaking point had finally, irrevocably arrived. Now, let me tell you what really happened, how a mother's quiet retreat became a daughter's slowly dawning, and perhaps unacknowledged regret. Clara hadn't always been this way, this polished, remote creature who spoke of aesthetics and vibes with an almost religious fervor. I remember a little girl with paint-smeared cheeks and eyes that sparkled with an untamed creativity, a girl who would proudly present me with lopsided clay pots and wildly imaginative drawings of three-headed dragons and talking squirrels. Our small, sun-drenched kitchen was her first studio, the refrigerator door her first gallery. Arthur, bless his patient soul, would feign terror at the dragons and engage in lengthy, serious conversations with the squirrels, much to Clara's giggling delight. We weren't wealthy, Arthur a history teacher at the local high school, I a part-time librarian, but our home was rich in love, in stories, in the messy, joyful chaos of a life lived fully. We encouraged Clara's artistic talents, scraping together pennies for art supplies, for summer art camps, for special lessons with a local watercolorist whose gentle guidance helped nurture her burgeoning gift. I remember the pride, so fierce it almost hurt, when she won her first art competition, a small local affair, but to us, it was the Pulitzer, the Turner Prize, all rolled into one. Her winning painting, a surprisingly evocative landscape of the woods behind our house, still hangs in my hallway, a poignant reminder of a simpler, sweeter time. The change began subtly, around the time she went off to art school in the city. The initial excitement of her new environment, the exposure to new ideas, new influences, was understandable, but gradually, her letters, then her calls, became less frequent, her tone cooler, more detached. She started to speak of her childhood, of our provincial life, with a faint, almost imperceptible note of condescension. My homemade cookies, once her favorite treat, were now too heavy, her palate apparently recalibrated by artisanal, gluten-free confections. My carefully chosen, hand-knitted scarves were sweet, Mom, but not really my style anymore. Her style. It was a phrase that began to crop up with increasing frequency. A shield, it seemed, against anything that reminded her of her less sophisticated, less curated past. Arthur, in his gentle way, would try to bridge the growing gap. "She's just finding her feet, Eleanor," he'd say, his eyes troubled. "It's a big world out there. She'll come back to us." But Arthur, my rock, my anchor, was taken from me too soon. A sudden, unexpected heart attack, stealing him away one crisp autumn afternoon, leaving a void in my life, and in Clara's, that could never truly be filled. Or so I had thought. After Arthur's death, Clara's detachment seemed to accelerate. She threw herself into her art, her ambition, a burning, all-consuming fire. She met Damien, a gallery owner with a sharp suit, even sharper cheekbones, and an air of jaded cynicism that I found instantly repellent. Damien, it seemed, became the arbiter of Clara's taste, her aspirations, her very identity. He discovered her, championed her work, dark, challenging, minimalist pieces that I, in my provincial ignorance, struggled to understand, let alone appreciate. But I tried. Oh, how I tried. I attended her early exhibitions, small, sparsely attended affairs, in dimly lit backstreet galleries. I'd stand before her canvases, searching for a flicker of the joyous, untamed creativity I remembered from her childhood, but finding only a cold intellectual rigor that left me feeling excluded. "It's very strong, dear," I'd say, my voice hesitant, and she would offer a tight, almost pitying smile, as if my inability to grasp the profound depths of her artistic vision was just another confirmation of my hopeless traditional obsolescence. Damien, of course, would offer no such concessions to my maternal sensitivities. He'd sweep past me, a gust of expensive cologne and dismissive pronouncements, his arm possessively around Clara's waist, his conversation peppered with names I didn't recognize, theories I didn't understand. I became, in their world, an increasingly irrelevant, slightly embarrassing appendage. The funding for this particular gallery opening, the one that was to be her breakthrough show, had been a point of quiet contention. Clara had approached me, her usual cool composure tinged with an uncharacteristic nervousness. "Mom," she'd begun, "Damien thinks this show could really launch my career, but we're a little short on the funding for the gallery rental, the catering, the PR. It's a significant investment, but the returns could be huge." I knew what was coming. Arthur's life insurance, the modest nest egg we had so carefully husbanded, was not a vast fortune, but it was my security, my buffer against the uncertainties of old age. Yet, how could I refuse? This was Clara's dream, her moment, and so I had agreed, transferring a substantial portion of my savings into her account, a silent, maternal sacrifice made, as always, with a prayer for her happiness, her success. The invitation to the opening had arrived late, almost as an afterthought, a sleek minimalist card that felt cold and impersonal in my hands. And then, the phone call, the carefully worded request to stay in the background, to not clash with the aesthetic. The aesthetic. As if a mother's love, a lifetime of devotion, could be reduced to a mere matter of style, of clashing colors and inconvenient, traditional textures. The night of the gallery opening was a study in carefully constructed artifice. The space itself, a converted warehouse in a newly fashionable, formerly derelict part of the city, was vast, cold, and echoing. Spotlights, harsh and unforgiving, illuminated Clara's canvases, large, dark, abstract pieces that seemed to vibrate with a restless, angry energy. The guests, a throng of impossibly thin, impeccably dressed individuals, moved through the space with an air of studied nonchalance, sipping champagne from delicate flutes, their conversation a low, indecipherable murmur. I felt like an anthropologist observing an alien tribe, their rituals, their customs, utterly foreign to me. I had chosen my outfit with care, a simple, elegant dress in a deep sapphire blue, a color Arthur had always loved. My late husband's mother's pearls, a quiet statement of enduring value, graced my neck. I carried a small beaded evening bag, a relic from a more gracious era. I thought I looked presentable, dignified, but in this sea of avant-garde fashion and calculated cool, I felt dowdy, out of place, an embarrassing anachronism. Clara, when she finally deigned to acknowledge my presence, offered a fleeting, distracted peck on my cheek, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important, more influential. "Oh, Mom, you made it," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too brittle. "Damien's over there, talking to that critic from Art Forum. You must meet him later, if he's not too busy." She gestured vaguely towards a knot of people surrounding Damien, who was holding forth with an air of pontifical authority. Then she was gone, swept away in a flurry of air kisses and exclaimed greetings. I found myself, as instructed, gravitating towards the catering tables, a small shadowed alcove at the far end of the gallery. The canapes were tiny, unidentifiable, and I suspected, largely inedible. The punch was a lurid, artificial pink. I nursed a glass, observing the scene with a growing sense of detachment, of unreality. This was my daughter's triumph, her moment in the spotlight, and I, her mother, was a ghost at the feast, an uninvited spectator at the celebration of her success. I saw her across the room, laughing, animated, her hand resting possessively on Damien's arm. She looked beautiful, I had to admit, in a stark, dramatic way, but there was a hardness in her eyes, a brittle edge to her smile that hadn't been there before. The joyous, untamed creativity of her childhood seemed to have been extinguished, replaced by a cool, calculated ambition. Was this success? Was this happiness? It felt empty, hollow, a carefully constructed performance for an audience of equally performative individuals. The hours crawled by. I made polite, stilted conversation with a few other bewildered-looking stragglers who had also apparently been relegated to the catering corner, a distant, elderly aunt of Damien's, a nervous young intern from the gallery. We were the background, the supporting cast in Clara's grand production. Around 10 o'clock, just as I was contemplating a discreet escape, I overheard a snatch of conversation that made my blood run cold. Clara and Damien were standing near a particularly unsettling sculpture that looked like a mangled birdcage, their voices low but carrying in a momentary lull in the general hubbub. Absolutely essential. "We secure the funding for the Berlin show, darling," Damien was saying, his voice smooth, persuasive. "That critic from Art Forum was very impressed, but we need to strike while the iron is hot. Another 20,000 should do it." Clara sighed, a sound of weary exasperation. "I know, Damien, I know. But I've already tapped Mom out for this one. I don't think there's much left in that well." Tapped Mom out? Like I was a depleted resource, a mine that had been fully exploited. Damien chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I'm sure dear old Eleanor has a bit more stashed away somewhere. These old ladies, they're always surprisingly frugal. You just need to apply the right kind of pressure, darling. A little guilt, a little reminder of maternal duty. Works every time." My heart, which had been a dull, aching weight in my chest all evening, now seemed to stop altogether. The casual cruelty, the blatant cynical manipulation, it was breathtaking. They weren't just dismissive of me, they were actively, callously, planning to exploit me further. The carefully constructed dam of my composure, the one I had maintained for so long, finally, irrevocably broke. Not in a flood of tears, not in a torrent of rage, but in a sudden icy clarity. This was not my daughter. This was a stranger. A cold, calculating opportunist who wore Clara's face, but who possessed none of her heart, none of her soul. I set down my glass of lurid pink punch, my hand surprisingly steady. I smoothed down the skirt of my sapphire blue dress, a dress Arthur would have loved. I took a deep, steadying breath, and then, with a quiet dignity I hadn't known I possessed, I walked out of that gallery, out of that cold, artificial world, and in a way I didn't fully realize until much later, out of Clara's life. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The background, I decided then and there, was exactly where I wanted to be, as far away from her and her destructive, soul-crushing ambition as possible. The walk home from the gallery was long, the city streets dark and indifferent. The cool night air felt good on my burning cheeks. My mind, however, was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions: grief, anger, a profound, bone-deep sorrow, and surprisingly, a strange nascent sense of liberation. The scales had fallen from my eyes. The loving maternal illusions I had so long clung to had been shattered, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth. Clara, my Clara, was lost to me, consumed by a world and a man that valued only the superficial, the transactional, and I, in my quiet, unassuming way, had been nothing more than a means to an end, a convenient resource to be tapped out, and then, presumably, discarded. The decision to stay out of her life wasn't a conscious articulated plan at that precise moment. It was more of an instinct, a deep primal urge for self-preservation. I could no longer endure the casual cruelties, the constant dismissals, the soul-crushing feeling of being an embarrassment, an inconvenience, to my own child. My love for her, though still present, was now tinged with a profound, almost unbearable sadness. It was the grief of a living bereavement, the mourning for a daughter who was still alive, but who was, in every way that truly mattered, gone. The following morning, I woke with a strange sense of clarity. The emotional turmoil of the previous night had subsided, leaving behind a quiet, unshakable resolve. I would not engage. I would not confront. I would not plead for a love, a respect, that was so clearly, so demonstrably absent. I would simply withdraw. I would create my own background, a space of quiet dignity, of self-respect, where her shallow, self-serving world could not reach me. The first step was practical. I called my bank and arranged for a review of my accounts, particularly the joint account I still foolishly shared with Clara, for emergencies. I instructed them to require my explicit, written authorization for any future withdrawals above a nominal amount. It was a small act, but it felt significant, a reclaiming of my financial autonomy. Next, I turned my attention to my will. Like most mothers, I had assumed, without question, that Clara would inherit everything Arthur and I had worked our lives for. The thought of Damien, her manipulative, cynical Svengali, benefiting from our legacy, was now anathema to me. I called Mr. Abernathy, our old family solicitor, a kind, elderly gentleman who had handled Arthur's affairs with gentle competence. "Mr. Abernathy," I began, my voice clear and steady, "it's Eleanor Ainsworth. I need to make some rather significant changes to my will." He listened patiently as I explained, not in detail, the reasons for my decision, focusing instead on my desire to redirect my assets to causes that reflected my true values: a local hospice that had cared for Arthur with such compassion in his final days, and a small struggling arts education program for underprivileged children in our community. A program that nurtured the kind of joyous, untamed creativity I remembered in the young Clara before the world and Damien had gotten their hooks into her. Mr. Abernathy, a man of quiet discretion, asked no probing questions. He simply nodded, his expression understanding. "A will, Eleanor," he said, "is a testament to one's life, one's values. It is your absolute right to ensure that testament speaks your truth." The process of drafting the new will was surprisingly cathartic. With each clause, each carefully worded instruction, I felt a sense of reclaiming my own narrative, my own agency. My legacy would not be a reward for disrespect. It would be a celebration of kindness, of compassion, of the enduring power of art to nurture the human spirit, not just to decorate the stark white walls of a pretentious gallery. I didn't inform Clara of these changes. What was the point? She had made her choices. I was now making mine. The silence between us stretched. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. There were no calls from her, no texts, no attempts at contact. It was as if the gallery opening, and my quiet departure, had been a final unspoken severance. I grieved, of course. A mother's heart does not so easily relinquish its love, however wounded. But the grief was now overlaid with a new, quiet strength. I focused on my own life, my garden, my books, my volunteering at the local library. I reconnected with old friends, women whose companionship I had neglected in my long, often solitary, orbit around Clara's increasingly distant world. I discovered with a sense of surprise that my life, even without Clara at its center, could still hold joy, meaning, purpose. The background, I was beginning to realize, could be a surprisingly rich and fulfilling place, especially when it was a background of my own choosing. The first year of my self-imposed exile from Clara's life was a period of quiet adjustment, of recalibrating my own emotional compass. The sharp sting of her betrayal, the raw wound of her dismissal, began to slowly, almost imperceptibly heal, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache, a scar that would likely always remain, but one that no longer throbbed with an unbearable intensity. I learned to navigate the holidays, the birthdays, the anniversaries, without the familiar rituals, the often fraught expectations, of family gatherings. Christmas, which had once been a boisterous, chaotic affair centered around Clara, was now a quiet, reflective day spent with a few close friends, sharing a simple meal, good conversation, and the comforting warmth of genuine, uncomplicated affection. It was different, less overtly festive, perhaps, but also blessedly free of the underlying tensions, the unspoken resentments, that had so often characterized our family celebrations in recent years. I heard snippets of news about Clara, of course. Our town, though growing, was still small enough for gossip to travel with an almost alarming efficiency. She and Damien were still together, their artistic careers apparently flourishing, at least according to the glossy local lifestyle magazines that occasionally featured their achingly chic apartment or their pronouncements on the cutting edge of the contemporary art scene. I'd glance at these articles with a strange sense of detachment, as if reading about distant acquaintances, people whose lives no longer intersected with my own in any meaningful way. There was a pang, yes, a flicker of maternal pride mixed with a deeper, more profound sadness. But the visceral hurt, the feeling of personal erasure, had begun to fade. One afternoon, while browsing in a local bookstore, I came across a small, elegantly produced volume of poetry by a new young writer. The cover art, a striking abstract design in muted blues and grays, caught my eye. It was familiar. I picked up the book, my heart giving a strange little lurch. The artist credited for the cover design was Clara Ainsworth. My Clara. Her art, it seemed, was finding its way into the world, even without my direct financial support. I bought the book, of course. The poems were beautiful, poignant, filled with a raw, searching honesty, and the cover art, it was undeniably good. Strong, evocative, a testament to the talent I had always known she possessed. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride, yes, but also a renewed sadness, a sense of what might have been, of a shared joy in her success that now felt irretrievably lost. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't send a note of congratulation. My decision to stay in the background was not a punishment, not anymore. It was a boundary, a necessary act of self-preservation. She had made her choices. I had made mine. And our paths, it seemed, were destined to diverge. My life settled into a quiet, comfortable routine. My garden flourished under my care, the roses Arthur had planted years ago, blooming with a vibrant, defiant beauty. My volunteer work at the library brought me a sense of purpose, of connection to my community. My friendships deepened, offering a rich tapestry of shared experiences, of mutual support, of laughter and tears. I discovered with a sense of quiet surprise that I was content, not ecstatically happy, perhaps, but at peace, a peace I hadn't realized how much I had craved, how much I had sacrificed in my long, often unrewarding quest for Clara's love and approval. The background, it turned out, was not a place of diminishment, but a place of quiet strength, of self-discovery, of a hard-won, resilient serenity. And as I sat on my small porch swing on a warm summer evening, a cup of chamomile tea in my hand, the scent of roses heavy in the air, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had made the right choice, for myself, for my own precious, unrepeatable life. The silence from Clara's end was no longer a source of pain. It was simply a fact, a space where a relationship had once been, now filled with the quiet, steady hum of my own contented existence. It was nearly 3 years after the gallery opening, 3 years of carefully maintained distance, when the first tentative communication from Clara arrived. It wasn't a phone call, not a letter, but a small, anonymously sent postcard tucked into my mailbox. The image on the front was a reproduction of a famous Impressionist painting, one of mothers and children in a sun-dappled garden, a painting Arthur and I had taken Clara to see at a city museum when she was a little girl, a day she had, I thought, long forgotten. There was no message on the back, only my name and address, written in Clara's familiar, elegant script. My heart did a strange, complicated flip. What did it mean? Was it an apology, an olive branch, or just a random, meaningless gesture? I didn't know. I placed the postcard on my mantelpiece, next to the faded photograph of Arthur, and tried not to read too much into it. A few weeks later, another postcard arrived. This one depicted a quiet, snow-covered landscape, again with no message, only my name, and then another. A few weeks after that, a vibrant, joyful abstract that reminded me, with a pang, of Clara's own early, uninhibited work. It became a pattern. Every few weeks, a postcard would appear, always art-related, always unsigned, always silent. I didn't respond. I didn't know how. What could I say? The chasm between us felt too wide, the hurts too deep, to be bridged by these enigmatic, impersonal missives. But I kept them, tucking them away in a drawer with Arthur's old letters, a collection of unspoken words, of unanswered questions. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, as I was about to leave for my library volunteering shift, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I rarely received unsolicited calls, but something made me pick it up. "Hello?" A hesitant pause. Then, "Mom? It's Clara." Her voice was different, softer, less brittle, stripped of the cool, confident artifice I had come to associate with her. There was a vulnerability in her tone that I hadn't heard in years, not since she was a little girl, frightened by a thunderstorm or a bad dream. "Clara," I said, my own voice carefully neutral, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "This is a surprise." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I I needed to hear your voice." Another pause, longer this time, filled only with the static on the line, the drumming of rain against my window pane. Are you well, Mom?" she asked finally. "I am well, Clara," I replied. "And you?" I'm okay," she said, though her voice betrayed a weariness that suggested otherwise. "Things have been difficult." I didn't pry. I didn't ask about Damien, about her career, about the glossy, curated life I had only ever glimpsed from the periphery. If she wanted to share, she would. I got your postcards, Mom," she said, her voice choked with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "The art. It was beautiful. It reminded me of things I'd forgotten. Things she'd forgotten. Like a mother's love. Like the simple joy of shared beauty. Like the woman who had first introduced her to the wonders of a paintbrush, a tube of paint, a blank canvas filled with infinite possibilities. "I'm glad you liked them, Clara," I said softly. There was another long silence. Then, "Mom," she began, her voice trembling, "I made a terrible mistake. I was a terrible daughter. I was so caught up in trying to be someone I wasn't, in trying to impress people who didn't matter, that I pushed away the only person who ever truly loved me, truly believed in me, unconditionally." Her words, so raw, so honest, hung in the air between us. The apology I had long thought would never come, the acknowledgement of the hurt she had caused, it was finally here, and it was devastating. And in a strange, unexpected way, profoundly healing. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Mom," she continued, her voice thick with tears. "I don't deserve it, but I needed you to know. I needed you to know that I see it now, what I did, what I lost." I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path down my own cheek. The years of pain, of quiet sorrow, of carefully constructed detachment, seemed to melt away in that moment, leaving behind only the raw, enduring and impossibly complex bond of a mother and her child. "Oh, Clara," I whispered, my voice hoarse with unshed grief, and a dawning fragile hope. "Oh, my dear, dear child." The background, it seemed, was no longer quite so vast, quite so distant, and the path ahead, though still uncertain, no longer felt quite so irrevocably, so devastatingly alone. The conversation with Clara that rainy afternoon was not a magical absolution, not an instant erasure of years of accumulated hurt. It was, however, a beginning, a fragile, tentative first step on a long, arduous road towards a potential, if uncertain, reconciliation. We talked for over an hour, our conversation punctuated by long silences, by hesitant confessions, by the shared unspoken weight of so much lost time. Clara spoke of her life with Damien, a life that had, she admitted, been built on a foundation of ambition, insecurity, and a desperate need for external validation. She described the hollowness of her artistic success, the way Damien had controlled her, manipulated her, isolated her from anyone who might offer a different perspective, a truer reflection of her own worth. She spoke of the gallery opening, of her cruel words to me, with a shame that was palpable, even over the crackling phone line. "I was so afraid, Mom," she whispered, "so afraid of not being good enough, not being cool enough, not fitting into his world, and I sacrificed you to that fear. I sacrificed everything that truly mattered." Her honesty was disarming, her remorse seemingly genuine, but a part of me, the part that had been so deeply wounded, remained guarded, cautious. Trust, once shattered, is not so easily reassembled. "I appreciate your apology, Clara," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "And I want to believe it. But words, my dear, are easy. It's actions, consistent actions, that rebuild what has been broken." "I know, Mom," she said. "I know, and I don't expect anything. I needed you to know. I'm not with Damien anymore," she added, her voice barely a whisper. "I left him a few months ago. It was hard, but necessary. I'm trying to find my own way now, my own art, my own self." That, I thought, was perhaps the most hopeful sign of all. Clara, stripped of Damien's influence, of the pressures of that artificial, self-absorbed world, might finally have a chance to rediscover the talented, sensitive young woman I remembered, the girl who had once painted three-headed dragons with such uninhibited joy. We didn't make any grand plans for a reunion. We didn't promise to erase the past. We simply ended the call with a quiet understanding that a door, long closed, had been tentatively, cautiously, pushed ajar. The postcards continued to arrive, but now they occasionally included a short, handwritten note. "Thinking of you, Mom." Saw this, and it reminded me of our trip to the coast. Small things but significant. Tentative feelers, extended across the chasm of our estrangement. I started to respond, equally tentatively. A brief note accompanying a pressed flower from my garden. A newspaper clipping about a local art exhibition I thought she might find interesting. It was a slow, delicate dance, a relearning of a language we had both almost forgotten. One Saturday morning, a few months later, there was a knock on my door. It was Clara. She looked different, thinner perhaps, her expensive clothes replaced by simpler, more comfortable attire. Her eyes, though still tinged with a residual sadness, held a new clarity, a new humility. She was holding a small, slightly lopsided, home-baked apple pie. I tried your recipe, Mom," she said, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "It's probably not as good as yours, but—" I opened the door wider. "Come in, Clara," I said, my voice gentle. "It smells wonderful." We sat in my sun-drenched kitchen, the kitchen where she had taken her first steps, where we had shared so many secrets, so many dreams. We ate the apple pie, which was, in fact, delicious. We talked, not about the past, not yet, but about the present, about her new, small studio apartment, about the part-time teaching job she'd taken at a community arts center, about the quiet joy she was rediscovering in painting for herself again. Not for the critics, not for Damien, but for the simple, unadulterated love of it. There were no dramatic declarations of forgiveness, no tearful embraces, but as I watched my daughter, my Clara, her face animated as she spoke of her newfound fragile independence, a quiet, profound sense of peace settled over me. The background, the place she had once relegated me to, was no longer a place of exile. It was simply a part of the landscape of our lives, a landscape that was, perhaps finally, slowly beginning to heal. The journey would be long, I knew, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, it felt like a journey we might, just might, be able to navigate together. The rebuilding of our relationship, Clara's and mine, was not a swift or easy process. It was more like tending a long-neglected garden, requiring patience, consistent effort, and a willingness to prune away the dead wood of past hurts to allow new growth to emerge. There were days when the old resentments, the shadows of past betrayals, would surface, unbidden, casting a chill over our tentative interactions, moments when a careless word, a fleeting expression, would trigger a fresh wave of pain, a reminder of the chasm that had once separated us so profoundly. But we persevered. Clara, to her credit, was unwavering in her commitment to mending the fences she had so carelessly, so cruelly, broken. She continued her visits, her calls, her small, thoughtful gestures. She never asked for anything, never hinted at any expectation of financial assistance or a revision of my will. Her focus seemed to be solely on rebuilding our connection, on earning back my trust, my affection, not through grand pronouncements, but through consistent, humble, everyday actions. She started helping me in my garden, her once perfectly manicured hands now calloused and earth-stained as she patiently weeded, pruned, and planted alongside me. We'd work in comfortable silence, the shared task a quiet communion, a healing balm for wounds that words alone could not always reach. she brought Leo and Lily to visit, her two beautiful children, my grandchildren, who were slowly, tentatively, beginning to understand that the lady from the art gallery was, in fact, their grandmother. Leo, now a bright, inquisitive 7-year-old, would pepper me with questions about Arthur, about my childhood, about the stories behind the old photographs that lined my hallway. Lily, a shy, sweet-natured 5-year-old, would sit on my lap, her small hand clutching mine, as I read to her from the same worn copy of Goodnight Moon I had once read to Clara. These moments were precious, fragile, imbued with a bittersweet joy. I was acutely aware of the lost time, the years of missed cuddles, missed stories, missed milestones, but I focused not on what had been lost, but on what was being, however slowly, however imperfectly regained. My will remained unchanged. The bulk of my estate was still destined for the hospice and the children's arts program. Clara knew this. We had spoken of it once, briefly, after one of her visits. "Mom," she'd said, her voice hesitant, I know about your will. Mr. Abernathy, he mentioned it to a colleague of Damien's, before everything. I understand, and I don't expect anything. I want you. I want my mother back, if that's even possible." Her words, so devoid of the old entitlement, so filled with a genuine, painful humility, had touched me deeply. "It's possible, Clara," I'd replied, my voice soft. "It's always possible. But it takes time, my dear. It takes work, from both of us." And work we did. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. We excavated the past, not to assign blame, but to understand, to forgive, to find a way forward. There were tears, of course, difficult conversations, moments when the old hurts threatened to overwhelm us. But we held on, bound by the enduring, if deeply scarred ties of mother and child. One afternoon, as we were sitting on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of rose and lavender, Clara turned to me, her eyes filled with a quiet, reflective sadness. "You know, Mom," she said, "for so long I was so afraid of becoming like you, so afraid of being seen as ordinary, traditional, unfashionable. I wanted to be everything you weren't, and in trying so hard to be different, I lost myself. I lost you. And I almost lost the best parts of who I am, the parts that are like you, the love of art, of beauty, of simple, honest things." Her confession, so raw, so vulnerable, was a profound gift. It was an acknowledgement, not just of her own failings, but of the quiet strength, the enduring values she had once so carelessly dismissed in me. "Oh, Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion, reaching for her hand, "it's never too late to find your way back, to yourself, to what truly matters." The background, the place she had once relegated me to, was no longer a place of exile, of diminishment. It was, I realized, simply the rich, fertile soil from which new beginnings, however unexpected, however hard-won, could still miraculously bloom. My legacy, I knew then, would not just be in the legal clauses of my will, or in the charitable works it would fund. It would also be in this, in the quiet, resilient, and ultimately triumphant healing of a mother's broken heart and a daughter's rediscovered soul. The final chapter of my story, or perhaps more accurately, this particular volume of it, did not end with a dramatic rewriting of my will, nor with a complete erasure of past hurts. Life, I've learned, is rarely so neat, so conveniently resolved. The scars remained, a testament to the wounds inflicted, the battles fought. But scars, when they heal, can also be a sign of strength, of resilience, of a profound, hard-won understanding. Clara continued her slow, steady journey of reconnection, not just with me but with herself. She sold her stark, minimalist apartment in the city, the one that had always felt more like a Damien-curated art installation than a home, and moved into a small, slightly shabby cottage on the outskirts of town, not far from me. It had a rambling garden, much like the one I had loved so dearly at the bungalow, and she threw herself into its restoration with a surprising, almost fierce joy. She started painting again, not the dark, challenging abstracts that had won her Damien's approval, but vibrant, expressive landscapes, still lifes filled with a quiet, luminous beauty, pieces that echoed, in a strange, full-circle way, the untamed creativity of her childhood. Her art, once a weapon in her arsenal of sophisticated ambition, was becoming once more a source of genuine personal expression, a reflection of her own slowly healing soul. Leo and Lily became regular visitors, their presence filling my quiet home with a boisterous, joyful energy I hadn't realized how much I had missed. They'd help me in my garden, their small hands surprisingly adept at weeding and planting. We'd bake cookies in my sun-drenched kitchen, the air filled with the scent of cinnamon and laughter, a fragrance that spoke of a new generation of shared memories being lovingly, carefully created. They knew me now, not as the lady from the art gallery, but as Grandma Eleanor, the teller of stories, the keeper of secrets, the purveyor of slightly lopsided but undeniably delicious home-baked treats. My will, the one that directed the bulk of my estate to the hospice and the children's arts program, remained unchanged. Clara never asked about it, never hinted at any expectation of its revision. Her focus, it seemed, was genuinely, refreshingly, on the present, on rebuilding our relationship, on nurturing the fragile, precious bonds of family that had been so nearly, so tragically severed. But I did make one small, final alteration. I instructed Mr. Abernathy to add a codicil, a personal note to be read to Clara after my passing. It wasn't about money or possessions. It was about forgiveness and love. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you are reading this, it means my time on this earth has drawn to a close. I leave this world with a heart filled not with bitterness, but with a quiet, profound gratitude for the journey we have shared, both its sorrows and its unexpected hard-won joys. My decisions regarding my material legacy were made from a place of deep conviction about honoring values that transcend familial obligation, but my love for you, my child, has never wavered, even in the darkest of times. It is a love that is, and always will be, unconditional. The greatest inheritance I can leave you is not money or property, but this, the knowledge that you are loved, deeply, irrevocably, and that it is never too late to find your way back to your truest self, to the goodness, the creativity, the unique and precious light that has always resided within you. Live well, my darling girl. Paint your truth. And know that your mother, your embarrassing, traditional, old-fashioned mother, loved you more than words can say, right to the very end. Stay in the foreground of your own beautiful, imperfect, and infinitely precious life. The background, I had learned, was not a place of exile, but a vantage point, a place from which to observe, to reflect, to gather strength, and sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, it is also the place from which you can quietly, patiently, lovingly help guide a lost child back to the light. And that, I believe, is a legacy more valuable, more enduring than any masterpiece hanging on a stark white gallery wall.